Elliot West. I'm a journalist and writer. Some of you may know me from my sorry. Some of you may know me from my snooker writing. I just want to say that I've just created and written a book on Amazon. It's called Shackled, and it's a 213-page book. A novel. That's what the cover looks like. That's what it looks like in hardback. And it's a great book. As I said, 213 pages, short bursts of events. Got a lot of positive feedback from it. 8 reviews so far, 5-star reviews. Comments like, it's gripping, can't put it down. So I'm really happy with it, and I'm just putting the word out now to have a look at it and see what people think. Because it's a slow burner, I think. 55 copies, I think it's got a lot more potential than that. I've decided to write a sequel to it, so that's going to be entitled Renaissance. And that's going to be a continuation of the story. Sorry, a bit nervous because this is my first Instagram live. I've done a couple of podcasts and things like that, so if I'm a bit shaky with my voice, that's why. So I'll give you sort of a little overview of the story. I don't want to give too much away because some of you have read it and a lot of people haven't read it. That's why I've only sold 55 copies. But it's set in Louisiana in Victorian times in the south of America, in a place called Baton Rouge, which... obviously at that time there was a lot of slavery, so people obviously say, why as a white person do you write a black person story? Well, why not? I mean, this story came out of my head. I'll tell you what happened. Just got a title in my head because I never thought I could write a book, you know. I mean, as people who read my stuff on my website, greenbays1972.com, know. I've done a lot of writing on snooker and stuff like that, about celebrities, about, you know, inspirational stories, a lot of black history, Windrush and stuff like that. So I never thought I could, you know, write a book. But as I said, you know, as a writer, you get these inspirational days. And it was a bit like, I don't know, a bit like an episode of Dallas or something like that, you know, if you're old enough to remember Dallas. You know, when Bobby came out the shower. Well, I came out the shower and this idea came into my head, which was the title, Shackled. And over a 2-month period, I was writing. And it was like a movie running in my head, which was amazing, you know, because, you know, I really didn't think I could finish it, but it just kept going and going and going until it concluded. But I left it open at the end. You know, but I'm sort of, you know, I'm very proud of it. But going back to what the story is, which I'm sure you want to know what the story is. So, as I said, it's based in Victorian times. The lead character is Constance Johnson. She has a husband and children. They're living happily, as well as you could in those sort of times, being a black person, which, has never been easy in any age or era. So, but yeah, a gang from a farm come and take them from their home, burn their house down. They're all separated. None of them know where each of the family have gone. And Constance Johnson, she's obviously enslaved and put to work in a cotton field. And you think that this would be her life from now on, but, there is a but. Because this is no ordinary woman. Constance Johnson is no ordinary woman. She is a tough cookie, and she resists everything that is thrown at her. I'm not going to say what's thrown at her, because there's a lot of things thrown at her in the book. But she escapes. And this is about her story and how she falls in love with another slave called Josh, and they hatch a plan to escape, and they obviously escape. And they cross America, get a ship, go to Bristol, spend time there, and then come back to America eventually. And as I said, I'm not going to give too much away, but it's a great story. It's powerful. I don't think I've had any negative feedback from it. Only people from social media. And I've boosted my posts a few times, and you get all these idiots on social media saying, "Oh, your cover is an AI image. This means that your story is going to be an AI image. Your story is going to be an AI story." Come on, I would be very silly to do something like that. When I write something, it's from the heart. I always write from the heart. My stories are always powerful. They're always about people who resist. And I think that's something that I've always been passionate about. I've always been passionate about politics and about equality and, especially women in society. I think women in society have had a rough ride in life, and that's the same today, I'm not saying slavery has gone away, because, there's modern day forms of slavery, but this is a snippet of life in that era, I did very little research on this book, I must admit, and if some of it isn't accurate, but as I said, it's a fictional story, and it's come out of my head. And this is how I see it from my perspective, And my greatest aim, because I've, out of those 55 sales, the majority of the sales that I've had have been in the UK. I've had a sale in France, Germany, 2 sales in the US. So what I would like to discover and find out is whether, I can crack America, because in America, this slavery is a taboo thing anyway, and people don't want to talk about it, and, it's an oppressive regime which, the British have a lot of blame for what happened to black American, black African slaves. But as I said, my story is something to do with that, but it's not all to do with that, because I think what you'll find in this story is there's a lot of characters. I'm not going to deny there's a lot of characters, and but those characters are a mix of pure evil people, which you would expect with slavery, but people who are empathetic to Constance and Josh's cause, which I think is great, And there's a lot of people in here. Well, there is a lot of people in here, and I'm pleased to say, hello Steve, hello Kelly, hello Y, English with teacher. So thank you for joining me, because I thought I was going to be talking to no one. I thought I was just going to be talking to myself, really. So someone sent a request, actually. No, maybe I won't go with that person, but so I think, as I said, this is a slow burner, but it's got potential. And as I said, I didn't want to create a book which would overtax the brain, and people would just get lost in the story, because that's not my aim. I want someone to be engaged with my story. I want people to run with my story. I want people to live what these people have lived through their reading of the story, and live the people's experiences. Because a lot of what is about reading is obviously your imagination and how you interpret the words, I mean, it's all very well for me to write something, but it has to, play out in someone's mind. And if I can do that, then that's great, because, I've cracked the nut. For me, that's like hitting the jackpot, And yes, of course, I want to sell books, but that is only a percentage of it. The joy of writing is writing. But once you've written a book, once you've published a book, which I'll talk about in a minute, because self-publishing is a minefield. It is a minefield, and I will say that because I decided not to go down the route of a publishing house. And whether it's true or not, whether a publishing house takes a large chunk of your money, I don't know, of your profits. But I decided to self-publish. And I earn very little money from these books. I mean, I might earn, I don't know, £4, £5, depending, each copy, depending on, what format it is. Obviously, considerably less if it's a Kindle version, more if it's a hardback, and in the middle if it's a paperback. But, I'm not going to become a millionaire anytime soon from writing, and, you have to be, an incredibly successful writer if you are going to achieve those goals. But what I will say is that I think this would be a great film, because I don't think there's anything out there that has been written in this style before. Because, if you look at 12 Years a Slave, roots, things like that. They're concentrations of slavery, But my book starts off with slavery, but then quickly, via the escape, goes on to other forms of, other forms of abuse, other forms of racism, but then shows empathy, because there's, as I said, there's so many people in this book, that treat Constance and Josh like human beings, and that was the whole thing about being a slave. You weren't treated like a human being, more like an animal. And that's something that, I wanted to show, that these people were human. They had thoughts, they had beliefs, they weren't just dumb and uneducated people, and you'll see that, Josh and Constance are illiterate, actually, in the start of the book, but through the book, and through a character in the book, they learn how to read and write, and as you'll see in my next book, they are thousands of miles away from where they were in the first novel, because they've come on leaps and bounds, and I don't know, grown as people. I mean, they always had, those inner strengths, and when I write about Constance Johnson, I have to become Constance Johnson, for that period of time, and I have to, right through her eyes. And that is, for me, incredible, because not only is that person a woman, she's black, and she has such strength of character and resolve, because she is able to resist. And that's something, especially at that time, we still have prejudices in society now, we still have sexism in society now, but, if you compare that to how it was then, being a woman, you weren't allowed to have an opinion, you weren't allowed to go out, you were considered to be, especially if you were black, you were supposed to be a maid or whatever you were supposed to be, a domestic help, or someone who, just spent all their time in the kitchen and looking after children and stuff like that. Well, that's rubbish. That is rubbish, because no woman, with their own, worth should have to do that, and it doesn't matter, what era you live in, you're always going to get people, especially women, who are strong and resist. And, I get quite passionate about this, because this is something that I love. I love to write about women and strong women. And Constance is one of these women. But as I said, this book is available it depends where you're viewing this video from, this live from. So I'm not sure which part of the world you are. A lot of you can be in the UK, some of you may be in Europe, some of you, a time difference maybe in America. But sadly, Amazon for whatever reasons, only allows me to sell in the UK and the USA. So if you are in Central Europe, unfortunately, you will have to purchase this book from Amazon UK, and then you'll have to get it shipped to France, posted to France, Germany, wherever you may be, depending where you are in Europe. But it's a reasonably priced book, A lot of people have said to me, it is reasonably priced. I don't think, $14.99 for a hardback, $10.99 for a paperback, $5.99 for, a Kindle download is a lot of money, really. And hopefully, I think once I get these two books together, because, as I said, there will be a sequel, and you will see, because Constance Johnson is in her early 20s at the beginning of the book, and by the end of the book she's sort of about 40, something like that. So it spans a 20-year period. But then the bridge over to the next book, you'll see what happens to her. And as I said, she'll be a bit older, probably about 45, something like that. And then you'll see in this book, in the second book, what happens to her for the rest of her life, And there will be some twists and turns in it, because I can't guarantee, I haven't figured it out yet. I've only written, a little bit of the introduction, so I have to get all the ideas into my head. But, I can't guarantee she'll stay in America, because this lady likes to travel, and she's got a taste of it, having gone to the UK, spent a bit of time in the Caribbean as well before going back to America. Not all positive experiences, because, the UK at the time, you think how many black people there were in Victorian England. Not as many races and creeds as there is today. So you think of how hard it would be for someone who was black to obviously walk onto UK soil and, whoa, the looks, the stares, the comments, all those sort of things. So it's hard. It's hard for anyone, of any race or colour, but especially, as I said, a black person, because, I can't begin to comprehend what it's like, I've had a pretty easy life in terms of that, but I've always been sympathetic, empathetic. I've always been, as I've said earlier, I'm a passionate believer in equality. Now, whether total equality will ever exist, I think that's, I think that's an aspiration. But, you're always going to get people in society who hate, and that's despicable for me, Yeah, I'm proud of this book, and I hope you read it, and I think it's, as I said, it's a slow burner. So, go out and buy it. I've got a taste for this Instagram Live now. I quite like it. So, I may see you soon, and I may talk about something else. and I'm not tech savvy, so I apologise to people who haven't engaged with this conversation. So next time I'm going to read up on it and wave and all the things you do with it, and maybe bring a few people up so that we can talk about whatever we're talking about, because it may be about this, it may be about the next book, or it may be about something completely different. It may be about what I write about snooker, which is not everyone's cup of tea, but I know I can write, and I know I can write about anything, and that for me is a gift from God, and that's a talent, and I think everyone has a talent, even if you don't, you can sing, you can write, you can play sports, to a top standard, but, it's not all about that, people have something inside them, and that is important in life, and we all need that, and it's very rare for someone to have a job, that they get 100% out of. Now, I'm not going to start commenting about my job, because my job is something completely different to what I'm talking to you about. But, when I retire in a few years, and I intend to retire in about 7 years, this is what I want to do full time. I've got a taste for it, and I love it, and I will continue to do it. So until next time, I wish you all a good night. Thank you for watching.